Our first speaker is Nikhil Taneja. Nikhil is a writer, a producer, a storyteller, an entrepreneur, and a youth mental health advocate. He's currently the co-founder and CEO of a youth media organization called Yuva, a platform that is creating purpose-driven entertainment to empower young Indians. So without further ado, over to you, Nick.
Okay. Hi, can you all hear me? Hi, my name is Nikhil Taneja. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a co-founder and CEO of a youth media organization, which also works on insights and impact called Yuva. Thank you for having me and thank you for placing me on a slot that is against my first love and greatest adversary, lunch. Sorry, I'm going to make some jokes. I apologize in advance. I spent most of my career listening to and telling stories across my time with Yash Raj Films, MTV India, Hindustan Times, and as a professor of journalism at Jai Hind College. So I'm going to start with a story today as well. This is a story of a young boy I met in Ahmedabad, Gujarat a few years ago as part of something called Main Hu Yuva, which are the open mics we do across the country, where people don't come and speak, do something with their talent, but it's a safe space where anyone who has a story and wants to speak up can come and just express themselves. This boy was an 18-year-old kid who just kind of came in. He was very nervous. He was shaking. He was sweating. He came in. He started reading a poem. At some point during reading, nervously the poem, he kind of looked up and interpreted what he was reading and said, I mean, as you could understand, I'm bisexual. We at that place cheered for him and we just said, woohoo. And for a second, this boy just looked up with a bit of surprise and just said that, did you all cheer for me? Said, yeah. He's like, wow, this is the first time in my life someone has accepted me on a forum like this. And he said, yeah, well, that's what these safe spaces are for. And he said, can I actually tell you my whole story? I don't want to read the poem anymore. And then he began his story, which is a bit heartbreaking. His story was that as an 18-year-old in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, he was bisexual. His parents found out, they threw him out of their home. And because they felt, this typical Indian thing called log kya kahenge, what will people say when they find out? His father thought that he needs to go to the doctor and needs therapy to kind of get better. And his mother just did not understand it. He was living in a hostel alone. He just finished school. He was trying to get into college. He spoke about his story and he spoke about how there was this one friend who accepted him and loved him for who he is. And we recorded this story. We put it up on our channel at Yuva, and this is one of the first stories we kind of put up. That story ended up going in its own small way, a little viral around Ahmedabad, Gujarat. And this boy started receiving a ton of love and communication from all sorts of people. In his story, he had mentioned how when he was younger and somebody in his school found out that he was bisexual, one of the kids in that school came up and flashed him. So it's a little hard. But when he put up that story, when we put up that story, someone actually reached out. Boys who had done this, who had bullied him, reached out and said, I'm sorry, and I did not know what you were going through. And today, after hearing you, I just felt like I was not a good person to you and I want to apologize. There were many other folks who said, we don't understand what LGBTQ means, but you seem to be a very sweet guy and I'm here if you want to talk. There were people from the LGBTQ community who kind of reached out and said that, if you ever need a space to talk to, we are here. What this boy did after that was incredible. He actually printed out all the beautiful stuff that he got on the internet on his Instagram DMs. He put them in a scrapbook. And then he went home to his mother and knocked on the door. She opened and he said, well, you told me that I can't stay at home because log kya kahenge, what will people say? Here's a scrapbook of what people are actually saying. Now, do you accept me? He said later to me that his mother, after hearing that, took that scrapbook and went through every comment that he had received, read it with a lot of love, held his hand and said, I'm going to try. This is the impact that social media can actually have. This is the impact of storytelling. This is one of the hundreds of stories I've heard between 2019 and 20 when I traveled for 6 months across India to over 120 campuses, 34 Indian cities. We did something called the Yuva Roadshow of Kindness. We heard over 10,000 young people. We went on this roadshow. Sorry, I forgot I also have a presentation. Not changing. Oh yeah, it is changing. Sorry. I also forgot that I have a presentation. Please look, there are some jokes here as well. We went on this roadshow because of a statistic marketeers in India love showing off in their sales deck, right? Um, India is the world's youngest country. Approximately 65% of our country is under 35, 50% of that is under 25. This is the largest youth workforce in the world. UNESCO has recently declared India as the #1 among having the most Gen Zs. This came on WhatsApp, so it must be true. Gen Zs in India are the first adults of the 21st century. Up until they were born, no other generation in this country has actually had anything in common with each other as adults, right? We are a country that has been united by differences in caste, class, community, creed, color, politics, difference of opinions, and who is better, Shah Rukh or Salman? Shah Rukh, obviously. But the Gen Zs, fondly called as digital natives by intelligent sounding people, are possibly the first generation to be united by a mobile revolution, the internet revolution, and are shaped by social media. Wow. I think they just realized I'm probably saying interesting stuff, so increase the volume. What they don't put on sales decks actually is the humanity behind these statistics. If you look up any Gen Z research study on SlideShare or go to ChatGPT, which I totally did do, the words used to describe Gen Zs include words like purpose-driven, authenticity seekers, social justice warriors, socially conscious, diversity champions, tech-lustrous, multitaskative, empathatron, etc. But if you just look up one Gen Z meme page on Instagram, you will hear and you will see something that reads, and I quote, "I want to cry, but I have things to do." A huge disconnect between what young people are and who we want them or understand them to be. We like projecting our aspirations or insecurities onto the young, and in a way that either idolizes them or demonizes them. This first struck me when I used to be working as the head of content and creative at Vital, the youth wing of Yashashran. Every week I'd have several pitches from writers, mostly male writers in the 30s, 40s, 50s, who were pitching me films about young India and who thought young people in India do one of two things: love or murder. Every week, on the other hand, I would also go to my classroom as a professor of journalism and meet 19 and 20-year-old students, and do that one thing which I felt like I never got as a teacher or got very rarely, which is that I try to listen to my students versus just talking to them. And I would hear these incredible stories of my young students and found them to be just beautiful, sensitive, incredibly thoughtful, but also very lonely. I started Yuva to actually understand the issues that young people face and try to find ways in which we can solve them. The roadshow is only when I first realized how social media is actually causing these issues or perhaps exacerbating them. And all of this obviously happened by just kind of listening to them. So I'm going to present 5 of my learnings from the roadshow and across 5 years of actually running Yuva, where my average teammate is born in a year which I look back now and call the good old days. The first thing. So when I was growing up as a millennial, I'm going to just do a little bit of a millennial versus Gen Z so that you kind of get this point better. When I was growing up as a millennial, my parents told me that I had to do engineering because I'm a boy. I first aggressively said no. They aggressively asked why. I aggressively responded, I don't know why. The fact is that at that point of time, pre-internet, pre-social media, I did not have any Twitter threads that told me that I can be rich and successful by writing Twitter threads. I did not have any examples. Even Chetan Bhagat wasn't famous then. As I said, good old days. So the challenge I faced as a millennial was finding out my identity. And the way to do that for me was to be a rebel, but without a discernible cause. The Gen Zs, on the other hand, have grown up in a post-internet world. So no matter what their parents tell them, they have this magical thing at their disposal called Google, right? So as I spoke about that young boy that I met, he probably went to his parents and said, this is who I am. I like boys as well. And the parents said, there is no such thing as that. You're not allowed to do this. But then he went online and then he searched and he found the term LGBTQ. And then he realized that he was probably a little less alone and he could find a community that cares for him, that allows him to be who he is. But at the same time, he still lives in conservative Indian society. That doesn't allow you to be who you are, but that asks you to be who your parents want you to be. And that's unfortunately the truth of the Gen Zs. We grew up in a world which was log kya kahenge, what will people say? These children are growing up in a world called parents kya kahenge, what will parents say? So they're rebels with a cause, and the challenge for them is being allowed to embrace their identities, which can get very exhausting. Speaking of parents, most millennials grew up being told that not just in how to live your career, but how to live your life. Anytime you would have your own thoughts and ideas about your selfhood or about your life choices, you would be screamed at and told, "Badon ki izzat karo." Respect your elders. No one ever said, "Sabki izzat karo," respect everybody. No one ever said, "Sabko pyar karo," love everyone. It was always respect your elders, badon ki izzat karo. But bachon ko tum laat, juta, chappal kuch bhi maar sakte ho. You can do whatever you want with young people, right? It's not that the parents of Gen Zs have changed that much, but the difference is when they say, "We know more than you." As a millennial, when I was growing up, it was kind of true. I didn't know shit. But when it comes to Gen Zs, it's explicitly false because of the internet and because of access to the multitude of information and the multiverse of apps that each contain one among many multiples of the identities that Gen Zs have. They don't actually know more than their parents, but they may not have the lived experience as them. So the generation gap that's always existed has actually turned, unfortunately, into a communication gap. And because the parents don't know how to make sense of this altered reality. What's made this interpersonal distance grow wider is that there isn't even a common language between parents and children today, right? Young folks speak through texts and snaps and emojis and memes and tweets, whereas their parents are still using words. Most parents today are struggling to bridge this divide. So unfortunately, it is actually upon the Gen Zs now to have empathy for their parents. The burden of empathy is on them because they understand that their parents don't understand and they wish that they did, which can get pretty depressing. Speaking of depression, there is Instagram. I mean, okay, as a millennial, I was constantly compared to one of three people by my mother: the topper in my class, the topper in my building, the topper in my family. No matter, who did well in an exam, as long as I did better than these three, Sharma ji's ladka, or for that matter, Sharma ji's offspring, an asshole, it was okay. I was let go, right? Now, imagine for the Gen Zs, they have Instagram, where everybody is the Sharma ji's asshole offspring, right? On Instagram, everyone is constantly awesome. Everyone is constantly amazing and achieving everything everywhere all at once. If it was frustrating for me to be compared to three people in my life, imagine being compared to 3 billion people on the internet or comparing yourselves to them. That's the reality they are growing up in. As a generation, boomers put the pressure on millennials to be successful. We use social media to show off every little thing that we did, every little success in life. The bar was so low. For the longest time, we were putting pictures of our food as success stories. But at the same time, we made it look like we were always happy. And so unfortunately, we have passed down this pressure of happiness on Gen Zs. And so Gen Zs are putting up stories that, everyone on Instagram is pretending to be happy, putting up stories of that happiness. And people who are viewing their lives through the prism of these stories are now forcing to live Instagrammable lives so that they can also put up stories pretending to be happy. And then every once in a while, when an authentic story is actually shared online, it is immediately monetized by a capitalist system that deals in likes but not in love. And the real stories of authentic self, of struggle, of failure, of heartbreak, of loneliness is actually lived between the stories that are shared online, which can get pretty gloomy. Speaking of gloom, there is Twitter. You know how I spoke about the good old days? Millennials love talking about the 90s where things were simpler, people were not assholes, rainbows were in the sky, love was in the air, Malaika Chopra was on the train singing Chaiya Chaiya. Life was perfect. But with a little perspective and time, you realize it's not that things weren't bad. We just didn't have Twitter. I mean, millennials also had it pretty terrible, right? We had MTV Roadies. It's not like we had it easy. And when generation has been spared from Raghu and Rajiv, they live in a time when news apps and Donald Trump remind them every second about how terrible life is and how we are all going to die very soon. Climate change is already bringing us closer to our deaths, but at the same time, young people also have to deal with rampant homophobia, xenophobia, misogyny, oppression, hate from the same people. Is it a wonder that they're embracing the futility of all? When I speak to young people, they tell me that they keep sharing like dank memes on DMs and their spam accounts where they tell everyone that I'm depressed, haha lol. And their friends are commenting, me too, haha lol. Offline depression has become a competition. You know how depressed I am? No. Do you know how depressed I am? And that's not surprising, right? Because in their teens and their 20s, young folks have lived through a pandemic, followed by a war, consumed through memes and reels playing out in trending hashtags, highlighting the broken new normal, where they feel everything all the time, but at the same time do not have the capacity to feel anything at all Because even anxiety is a chore on their never-ending to-do list. So what option do they have but to doom scroll to remember until they doom scroll to forget? Which, last bit, which can get pretty lonely. And so they look down. Most world folks look at the Gen Z as an entitled generation with everything at their fingertips. They're always looking on their phones. They're always on social media. They're always connected online, but disconnected offline. Well, after the roadshow, I realized why they look down. They look down because they're afraid that when they look up, will anyone listen to them? Will anyone understand them? Does anyone care about what they have to say? Online, young people on their phones or on social media are finding communities that don't judge them, that are providing safe spaces and are giving them the one thing that they don't get offline, which is empathy. But offline, all they're met with is judgment, they're met with labels, and they're met with an older generation that looks down upon them. And that is why they are looking down as well. So what is the solution to this loneliness? I believe one of the simple solutions, and again, I found this with the roadshow, is actually just listening to them. I've met several hundred people on the roadshow who have unfortunately told me that their parents haven't even told them I love you in their life so far. They've not even received hugs from their parents. They've not had anyone give them a physical, intimate touch of love or affection. So love for this generation isn't actually about romance. It is more about acceptance. They just want to be heard and seen. We live in a world where every young person has so much to say, but there's very few to listen. Patriarchy has always ensured that the power remains in the hands of old men who gatekeep whose stories get to be told and whose voices get to be heard. The only young people who actually get heard are those whose faces are plastered across hoardings you see across the country, who have achieved and excelled in a competitive exam and whose photos look like they've not taken a bath since 1942. You're only heard if you ace the story given to you by your elders and your society. Everyone else is shut down. I promise you, every young person has overcome something, and all we need to do is just listen to the story that must be told and must be heard. For that matter, I just want to say something to parents as well. I feel like it's also important for parents to share their stories with young folks. Don't let the onus of empathy to be on the youth. Reach out and bridge the divide. The beautiful thing about stories is that the more stories you share, the more stories will be shared with you. We need to create these offline spaces so young folks don't need to feel that they need to go on social media to find communities where, yes, at this point, they are finding spaces where they feel a little less alone. But unfortunately, a lot of them, especially young men, are also finding communities that are toxic and that are dangerous, and that in the facade of belongingness are teaching them narratives that push them into speaking of a world that is divided into us and them. But the moment you start listening to stories of each other, you realize that it's not a world where it's us and them, it's all us. There's more that we have in common with each other. There's more that unites us than that divides us. Whatever it is you're going through, stories can prove that there is no judgment, there's no labels, and you're not alone in this. We're in this together. That's all I have. I actually wanted to share another story, but I think we're out of time. Do we have time? Can I speak? Or no? No. Well, yeah, it's okay. I'll tell you more stories. If you want to hear them, please listen to me offline. But yeah, thank you so much. I'll just at least put my last slides. This is a really fun one. I'm sorry I missed it. And the last one is this. Okay, thank you so much. It was really nice being here.